I'm now going to do a basic setup of the RS5. Now normally you do this while the shock absorbers are off, when they're in the bubble machine sucking out all the bubbles in the shocks. I'm going to set up the car with the shock absorbers on the front just to show you how it's done, but as I said, normally you do it with the shocks off. On the rear I will disconnect the shocks because I'll show you how to set the roll bar at the same time. The front roll bar, once it's set, it normally never has to be touched unless you have a bad accident. First of all, you use a setup kit. That's for the rear, there are 2 holes in the chassis, and that's for the front, 1 hole in the centre of the chassis. So, see the mark there? That goes on the rear. Okay. Make sure that they're cleaned out if there's any rubber in them, because that's the important part of the setting. And the front then is underneath. There's actually 2. There's one there, or there's one there. I always use the inner one to allow you a bit more room to set up the front. Okay, now we just checked that it sits nice and flat, which is perfect. And the first thing you do is make sure the steering is in the centre. And what we need to do is measure the front axle heights to make sure they're equal. Now they're adjusted, if you come round, I will point it out. They're adjusted by that stop there on either side. There's one on this side, lock nut underneath, and that stop adjusts the front up and down, and exactly the same on the other side. You undo the lock nut at the bottom and then turn that screw to get it higher or lower so that they're both exactly the same. What we're looking for on the front is 66 to the axle. Okay, so I'm going to set the calipers to 66 millimeters. Okay, 66.02 won't make any difference. That's the measurement you're looking for there. It's just touching the base. Absolutely perfect. And the same then on this side. Just touching the base. Okay, so it's set at 66 mil, which is always the same. It never changes at all. Now what I like to do as well, just while we have, I know these are set perfectly, so your 2 axle heights are set exactly to 66 mil. What I like to do is, just to make sure nothing's bent, is just to check the heights of different parts of the car. Like that should be exactly the same as that, which it is. And the same as, say, the steering arm. That's telling you that the steering arms aren't bent, because they're both reading exactly the same. And you could run through a number of things if you weren't sure of the car. I know this one's okay, but that's how you check the front axle heights. Now, what we do now is turn the car around so we can set the rear. Normally I'd do it at the back, but because we're videoing, I'm going to turn the car around. Okay. Now, as I said, the front roll bar normally never has to be changed. It's always the same. You keep the same roll bar, never needs to be adjusted. The rear roll bar you need to tune. The reason is because it's a 4mm roll bar. The front is 6mm, very solid, doesn't move. The back you need to tune up because there is a little bit of play. So to set the rear, I am going to remove, not take the shocks off, but I'm actually going to remove the shocks from their mounting so that we have a bit of free play. I can do that. There. We've now got coming down to the stops. Now the adjusting stops on this car, on the rear, I will point them out, is one in there, where the Allen key is, and one on the other side, and that adjusts your stop for each side. One for this side, and one for this side. Very, very simple. The height for the rear, which again we are going to set on the calipers, is 63.5. Again, that never changes. They're the heights which we determined are the best for the car. 63.52, that's close enough. So we then again check that axle height there, and as you can see, I will just adjust this one. Just one second, a minute. Okay, now, so I will just bring this up a little bit. There. Okay, that is now exactly 63.5. Okay, and then we do the same to the other side. Exactly 63.5. Okay, so now the two axle heights are set. So what we have to do now is tune the roll bar. Now this is very important. If you don't tune a roll bar, you'll get more roll on one side than the other, and the roll bar could easily break if you have a rollover. What you have a little bit of play in the cup and the ball. So if I hold that side down and lift this side, there's a little bit of play there. See that? Now if I hold this side and do the same this side, now there is more play on this side than there is on this side. So I need to fine tune the roll bar. It's quite simple to do. Do it by the inside screw of here. Now I've just got to determine which side has to go. I need more play going down, so I just loosen that one a tiny amount and screw up the bottom a tiny amount, and then check it again. A bit more play now, equal to that side. So now they're both equal. So now you've got a nice smooth movement on your suspension. Really smooth movement on the suspension. That's now all done, so you know the axle height is right and the roll bar is tuned. That is very important to tune that roll bar, and you really need to do that nearly after every run, just to make sure it's right, because that's a very important part of the car. Okay, once we're happy with the setup of the axles and the setup of the roll bar, I'm now going to set the cambers and casters, so I'm going to put the wheels on first. I put brand new tyres on the car for setup. The reason is because if you've used a wheel, you might have hit a curb and it could be slightly warped, so there's no guarantee that it's straight. I always keep these purely for setting the car up, for the casters and cambers and toe-ins. I don't do the ride height because when you're racing, you don't know how rough the track is, and you don't know whether you're going to be using part-worn tyres on the front or rear, so you set your ride heights when you've decided what tyres you're going to use. Ideal ride heights we're running is 4mm at the front, 6mm at the back. That is on a smooth surface. You might have to go up a couple of mil depending on how rough the surface is. Okay, just normal setup caster and camber. You can take off the setup gauges and let the car sit on its own suspension. Now, I'm going to set this car up to a starting point, a standard setup where it will give you a car good enough to go around a track that you can part tune in depending on the surface and the track that you're racing on. So the very first thing would be the camber on the rear, which it never changes. It's always -3 when the car's pressed down. So there's the camber gauge, there's 0. -3 is to the right, so there is -3 on the gauge. So we lock that into position and you press the car down to the deck and hold the camber gauge up to the edge. As you can see, that's set to -3. And the same on this side. Just set to -3. The way it's adjusted is by that adjustment in there. You always set the camber before you set the toe in. The reason is because the camber does affect the toe in. So as you're adjusting the camber, the toe in will change. So you always set your camber first. But once you set that to -3, we never change it. It stays at -3. Any track we've ever raced at, cold, hot, it's always at -3. The front, I will turn the car around. The front of the car, it varies on the camber. We always set the car pressed down. Normally, a starting point, we set at 0 to start with, press down. If you need less steering on the front, we always go plus, which is top out. If you look for more steering, you go minus, which is top in. Now you need to make sure that it's set equally, which it is. And some tracks, most tracks, you'll find that if they are more right-hand corners than left, you'll need more steering on the left-hand corners than the right, so you can have different cambers on the front. The caster, which is in the middle here, if you bring the camera around, that's the caster there. We have that set in the center point. You can actually loosen 1, 2, 3 and 4 screws, and the caster will move forward or back. If you need more steering, you can move the caster forward. Less steering, move the caster back. We normally 9 times out of 10 have it set in the middle. Now I'm just going to set the toe out and the toe in of the car. The toe out of the front never changes. We set that to a fixed measurement of 122 millimeters with a flat edge. When your steering is straight, with a flat edge, you take a reading from that point there, and that will read 122 millimeters. It's normally easier doing this when the exhaust is not on. That never changes. It's 122 millimeters on either side. It gives you the correct toe out for the front. The rear, it varies a lot. That is one of the most important tune-up parts of an RS5, is the rear toe-in. 1 millimeter can make a big difference. And the rear toe-in, you measure again against the wheel, and you measure it from that spot, that point there, on both sides. That's where you take your measurement. Now, I know just through many times of doing it that if you go to the center of the tyre, that setting is exactly 110 millimeters, which I always find a very good start point. It's quite a lot of toe-in. We tend to have more toe-in than most other cars. GRP tyres like a lot of toe-in, and RS5 likes a lot of toe-in. But if you want a bit more steering coming out of a corner, then you're better off reducing your toe-in, and you can reduce it equally in the pits without having to measure. I'll show you how now. With a spanner, you can adjust it from these two here, and they're both set the same way, and you can work it by the flats on that adjuster. Going down makes toe-in go out. So if you want, we're on 110 millimeters. If you find you want more steering coming out of a corner, so you want the back end to go a little bit more lively, then you want less toe-in. So you can just go screw that down 1 flat, and then that will give you about 2 or 3 mil difference in the toe-in. Then if you do that once there, go to this side, do that once there, it means the toe-in is equal, and it's something you don't have to come right into the pit bench. You can come into the pit lane, give it 1 flat, and then the driver can take the car out and he'd know within 2 laps whether it's made a difference. Very, very easy to set up. Most important part of the car to get it right.